Historical detour number 2. I won a scholarship to the Santa Barbara Writers Conference in 1984. That's where I met Chris Moore for the first time. That's also where I met Shelley Lowenkoff, a writing instructor in the Master of Professional Writing program at the University of Southern California. Shelley was a big fan of Milan Kundera in those days, and he insisted that I needed to read Kundera's debut novel, The Joke, or Zert in the original Czech. I ended up liking Kundera's writing well enough and went on to read a few more of his books, including The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which taught me an interesting and useful Czech word, litost. According to Kundera, quote, "Litost is a state of torment created by the sudden sight of one's own misery," unquote. I've seen another Czech writer define it as the feeling we get when confronted with an immense, negative, and unchangeable breach of the order we expect the world to have. When something is turned inside out, upside down, and backwards from the way things ought to be. Kundera attributed an almost mystical quality to the word. Quote, "Litost is an untranslatable Czech word. Its first syllable, which is long and stressed, sounds like the wail of an abandoned dog. As for the meaning of this word, I have looked in vain in other languages for an equivalent, though I find it difficult to imagine how anyone can understand the human soul without it," unquote. To illustrate the concept, Kundera wrote about a pair of young lovers, a college student who couldn't swim very well and his athletic girlfriend, a strong swimmer. Quote, "She was madly in love with him and tactfully swam as slowly as he did. But when their swim was coming to an end, she wanted to give her athletic instincts a few moments free rein and headed for the opposite bank at a rapid crawl. The student made an effort to swim faster too and swallowed water. Feeling humbled, his physical inferiority laid bare, he felt litost. He recalled his sickly childhood, lacking in physical exercise and friends, and spent under the constant gaze of his mother's overfond eye, and fell into despair about himself and his life. They walked back to the city together in silence on a country lane. Wounded and humiliated, he felt an irresistible desire to hit her. 'What's the matter with you?' she asked him, and he started to reproach her. She knew about the current near the other bank and that he had forbidden her to swim there because of the risk of drowning. And then he slapped her face. The girl began to cry. And when he saw the tears on her cheeks, he took pity on her and put his arm around her, and his litost melted away," unquote. So, in this example, litost is generated by a casual display of superiority, which could be thought harmless, but it registers in the sensuous, irrational psyche of the perceiver as deliberate and cruel. As Kundera explained it, quote, "Litost works like a two-stroke engine. Torment is followed by the desire for revenge. The goal of revenge is to make one's partner look as miserable as oneself. The man cannot swim, but the slapped woman cries. It makes them feel equal and keeps their love going," unquote. If that's what it takes to keep love going, no wonder the divorce rate hovers around 50%. Quote, "It's not very pleasant to be slapped for knowing how to swim," unquote, Kundera wrote. We can extrapolate from there.
Hey. What the fuck? Hey! Dude, she kissed me. Fuck off, Tessa! What the fuck?
Marriage forces two dissimilar psyches to share a home built on the bedrock of their real or imagined love, and then it subjects them to the relentless chthonic pressures of monogamy and monotony and, usually, money worries. Love's many fault lines and fractures become a perpetual source of litost. Torment is pretty much a given in this world, but what if the desire for revenge is thwarted or impossible to achieve? What if the man is chivalrous and refuses to slap women around?
What do you think I am?
I've been hit before.
Not by me!
What if corporate greed is trumping the rights of local communities to protect their health, land, and water? Let's get even more specific. What if big ag companies like Monsanto, DuPont, BASF, Syngenta, and Dow AgroSciences decide to poison families on the island of Kauai by drenching 16,000 corporate-owned acres of GMO crops with an annual 12 tons of acutely toxic, quote, restricted use, unquote, pesticides, and a corrupt federal court system says there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it? What then? Note 25. In fact, a federal judge said that Dow AgroSciences and their ilk don't even have to reveal the names of the pesticides that are showing up in the bloodstreams of Kauai citizens. Larry Ellison, the multi-billionaire CEO of Oracle, owns about 97% of nearby Lanai, so he could probably do something about the poisoning of the Hawaiian Islands, if he wanted to, but you can bet he won't. When you've made billions of dollars by being a jerk, you know better than to interfere in the evil genius schemes of other billionaire jerks. No one wants to be a class traitor, especially when their class consists of well-heeled bandits, distinguished purveyors of environmental toxins, and a broad spectrum of tech-savvy psychopaths. Return to main text. Theoreticians familiar with these kinds of situations refer to them as instances of Litostblock, or so wrote Kundera, who went on to write that Litostblock is, quote, the worst that can happen, unquote. I've since come to think of Litostblock as a sort of grim cock-blocking of the soul, an extremely effective psychic weapon to be used against us by the Archons. To illustrate one of the self-harming, Archon-inspired methods we use to get around Litostblock, Kundera described another scene from the student's life. When the student was a child, he had to take violin lessons. The student always dreaded the lessons because he had no talent for the violin. Quote, and his teacher would interrupt him to criticize his mistakes in a cold, unbearable voice. He felt humiliated and he wanted to cry. But instead of trying to play in tune and not make mistakes, he would deliberately play the wrong notes. The teacher's voice would become still more unbearable and harsh, and he himself would sink deeper and deeper into his Litost. End quote. As Kundera summed up, there are two basic ways to deal with Litost. Quote, if our counterpart is the weaker, we find an excuse to hurt him, like the student hurting the girl who swam too fast. If our counterpart is stronger, all we can do is choose circuitous revenge, the indirect blow, a murder by means of suicide. The child plays the wrong note on his violin over and over until the teacher goes mad and throws him out the window. As he falls, the child is delighted by the thought that the nasty teacher will be charged with murder. Unquote. Here's a more elaborate example from my own family history. I have an older cousin who was a great beauty in her youth. In college, she decided to become a nurse. She met a handsome young orthopedic surgeon while he was doing his residency at a hospital in Fresno, and they got married. She soon gave birth to two handsome baby boys. Several years later, in 1992, they moved to Bainbridge Island and bought a big, beautiful house overlooking Puget Sound. The surgeon was offered a position in a thriving orthopedics clinic in downtown Seattle, and he started commuting to work each day by ferry. When I visited, I could watch the ferries silently come and go out in Elliot Bay as I sat talking with my cousin over breakfast in her lovely renovated kitchen. Her life seemed perfect in almost every way. Fresh-cut flowers in every room, a Range Rover in the driveway, and a seemingly endless supply of money, which my cousin often spent frivolously. In my eyes, she was one step removed from a princess in a fairy tale. She'd given up nursing long ago. Her days were spent raising the boys and entertaining friends and family. We, the people she entertained, were given the impression that she might be a little lonely, and entertaining was her way of compensating. But then we started to hear rumblings of a deeper trouble. One day, my cousin asked me if I wanted to go to Hawaii to look after her sons. She'd booked a family vacation there. Everything was already paid for. But she was angry with the surgeon, over what she wouldn't say, and she no longer wanted to travel with him. So, I went instead. I had a great time. The surgeon was difficult to get to know, but by the end of that trip, I loved him like a brother. My other brothers felt the same way about him. Talking among ourselves, we realized that we liked the surgeon perhaps even more than we liked our beautiful, fun-loving cousin. Months passed. My cousin's marriage started to show larger cracks. She kicked the surgeon out of the big, beautiful house he'd bought for her and told him to go live with me. At the time, I was renting a 2-bedroom ground-floor apartment with bad plumbing in a backwoods area of Bainbridge Island, near Poulsbo. I didn't have a Puget Sound view or fresh-cut flowers in every room. In fact, the whole place had a vague stench of sewage because of a backed-up septic tank system. I tried to cover it up with a lot of Glade sparkling spruce air freshener, so the apartment always smelled like someone had gone in there and shit out a pine tree. Despite the lingering stink, the surgeon and I had a surprisingly good time as roommates. In the evenings, after we both returned from work, we sat outside in webbed lawn chairs, talking and staring up into the infinite night while we smoked his cigars. The surgeon confessed that it had been a long time since he'd been laid. My cousin was waging a campaign of frigidity against him because he, quote, didn't talk enough, unquote, or so she claimed. I told the surgeon he should go on a talk-free date with a beautiful hearing-impaired woman to spite my cousin and boil off some of his litost. The surgeon said he could never do that. He didn't know sign language and he loved my cousin too much, but he was starting to reconcile himself to the idea of a divorce. He knew it would cost him, but he'd inherited millions from his recently deceased surgeon father, and he thought there would be enough money to go around to keep everyone happy. My cousin wouldn't have to give up her lavish lifestyle entirely. She'd just have to downsize a bit. Apparently, my cousin didn't like the idea of downsizing. One night, when the surgeon was visiting the big, beautiful house to see his boys and discuss the terms of his separation from my cousin, she seduced him. I'm not sure if seduced is the right word in this context. There might be a better word in Czech for a married woman who tricks her spouse into having sex with her after a long stretch of enforced celibacy so she can avoid a potentially litos-fraught divorce. The next day, the surgeon returned to my shit-smelling apartment exuberant, like a triumphant Viking back on Swedish soil after a successful bout of raping and pillaging. He informed me that my cousin had spread her legs for him again. I tried to feel happy for him, but my gut told me their rekindled romance was doomed. I wish I'd said to him, "Are you sure you don't want to date a deaf girl? I know a really cute one, and she won't mind if you don't talk a lot." The surgeon moved back into his big, beautiful house. I broke the lease on my backwoods apartment after the septic tank overflowed, and I moved to Seattle. I didn't see the surgeon quite as much after that, but I still visited and kept in touch with him via email. He was teaching me how to trade calls and puts in the stock market, and sometimes during those conversations, he would tell me how he was doing with my cousin. The surgeon had become a slinking dog for love, begging for just a few morsels of tenderness from a woman who kept him on a steady diet of sexual indifference and domestic harpy routines.
Did you ever love me?
When I was alone with her, my cousin complained that the surgeon had been acting closed off and depressed. Well, who wouldn't act that way in his situation? I wanted to ask her, but I didn't. The surgeon's deep, inexpressible love for my cousin prevented him from taking revenge on her in any direct way. Instead, he began to sabotage himself. To make up for my cousin's frivolous spending, he started taking huge call positions on Dell shares in the stock market. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars wagered on a daily basis. And Dell's stock did almost nothing but head straight down, making the calls worth less and less. The surgeon lost millions. Around that same time, the surgeon got addicted to oral narcotics. He was showing up at work so loaded that he eventually got caught and was barred from practicing as a surgeon until he checked into a rehab clinic and proved he could stay clean and sober. He got a job driving a school bus instead. By then, the big, beautiful house on Bainbridge Island had been sold to pay off his debts. The surgeon and I met for the last time at a small cafe in Seattle just before I moved to New York in the summer of 1999. I'd made enough money trading options to run a one-bedroom penthouse in Midtown Manhattan. I wanted to thank the surgeon for providing me with that opportunity. Note 26. Over a span of several months, I'd been making $5 to $10 grand at a pop by buying market-time calls on high-flying internet stocks like CMGI, which was just as insane as anything the surgeon had been doing with his Dell calls. The difference was that I held my calls for less than a week and I was making money rather than losing it, so I thought I knew what I was doing. I've since come to realize that I'd had no clue. Like a kid running through a fireworks factory with his hair on fire and making it out alive, I was just lucky. And high-frequency trading algorithms were about to wring that sort of luck out of the market for me forever. I've never been able to repeat that options trading feat since my move to New York, but if I'd had the good sense to put all my cash into long-term Apple calls instead of blowing it on a leased penthouse and a wedding, I would have done all right. Return to main text. When I saw him, the surgeon sat down and told me, apropos of nothing, that he was on a new drug called OxyContin that made him feel like he'd just taken a really great shit. Which, of course, reminded us of his stay in my sewage-scented apartment. We reminisced about that for a while. He said he'd moved into an efficiency apartment that wasn't much better than my old place. He also said my cousin was dating a lawyer. For the free advice, I presume. They didn't date for very long. The surgeon was still the same guy I knew and loved, but everything about him seemed blunted, as if he was talking at me through a layer of plastic wrap that was slowly suffocating him. I didn't know it then, but in a sense he was already dead. The Archons had him. Le Tost was the psychic weapon they were using against him. After all he'd been through, he must have felt like murdering someone. But because he was a surgeon,
First, do no harm.
taking revenge through his own annihilation probably seemed like the only option available to him. Less than a year after I moved to New York, I got married. Perhaps a bit rashly, but the union lasted for 17 years, so it wasn't a complete catastrophe. I invited my cousin to the wedding, but like the surgeon, she was too broke to travel by then. 3 years later, my parents called to tell me the surgeon had taken his own life. That happened in 2003. The surgeon was younger then than I am now. I don't remember anyone describing exactly how he died, but for years I was under the impression that he'd taken a scalpel to a secluded beach and opened his jugular vein just as the sun was going down. I imagined a relatively peaceful death, sitting barefoot in the sand, staring at the orange setting sun with a clench of his handsome jaw, the quick nick of the scalpel, followed by hardly any pain or fear at all. Just a gentle bleeding out, and then a smooth swoon into unconsciousness. That's not how it happened. My younger brother visited me in New York while I was working on this essay. He was out on the East Coast because another member of our extended family had just committed suicide. A schizophrenic brother-in-law who'd spent the last 20 years hearing voices telling him to kill himself. Note 27. Suicide isn't always about Le Tost and the inversions of revenge. Sometimes it's just a way to end unbearable pain and mental torment when the malevolent voices inside your head have been telling you that you're a burden to others and no one will ever find a way to help you. Return to main text. My brother's wife and 2 teenage daughters arrived in New York with him. After we all shared a good meal at Le Bon Soup on 55th Street, the women went back up to their hotel room while my brother and I went up to have a few drinks on the terrace of Salon de Ning, the rooftop bar at the Peninsula Hotel, where we quite naturally started to reminisce about the surgeon. There were obvious parallels to the brother-in-law's suicide. I described my vision of the surgeon dying serenely on a secluded beach. "Dude, he didn't do it at the beach," my brother gruffly told me. "I don't know where you got that." He went on to explain that he knew a paramedic on Bainbridge Island who'd been one of the first people on the scene when the surgeon's body had been discovered. It hadn't happened in the way I'd thought at all. The surgeon had died on the bed in his crappy little efficiency apartment, and his death had been in no way peaceful or serene. He'd taken Le Tost to its illogical conclusion and decided to make a bloody statement. He hadn't stared at the setting sun with a clench of his handsome jaw while making a tiny incision with a scalpel. The surgeon had stabbed himself in the heart with a steak knife. One of Milan Kundera's statements about Le Tost strikes me as at least partially untrue. He wrote, quote, "Anyone with wide experience of the common imperfection of mankind is relatively sheltered from the shocks of Le Tost. For him, the sight of his own misery is ordinary and uninteresting. Le Tost, therefore, is characteristic of the age of inexperience." End quote. I respectfully disagree. The surgeon wasn't inexperienced, but he was used to having things go his way. Handsome, rich, intelligent, gifted. How strange it must have felt when everything was taken from him. While it's true that he did it to himself, for the most part, it still must have come as a shock when he went from being a multi-millionaire orthopedic surgeon to an opioid-addicted driver of a yellow school bus. Crumbling love can do that to you, along with ramped-up stress levels from a drastic change in circumstances. Le Tost often has little to do with inexperience or immaturity. Note 28. About those ramped-up stress levels, sudden reversals in fortune, poor job prospects, a plunge in social standing, or the absence of human warmth and kindness can make people more likely to seek solace in drink, food, or drugs. We know that. But what I didn't know, or even think about until I read an article in the New York Times by psychiatrist Richard A. Friedman titled, quote, "What Cookies and Meth Have in Common," unquote, is that modern humans, or perhaps those pesky archons, have been designing the perfect environment for food and drug addiction in America. Americans have been getting fat and fried in increasing numbers. According to the article, quote, in 1990, no state in our country had an adult obesity rate above 15%. By 2015, 44 states had obesity rates of 25% or higher, unquote. Something similar has been going on with drug addiction. The New York Times, quote, estimated that more than 59,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2016, which represents the largest year-over-year increase ever recorded, unquote. I've read other news articles that claim there are now as many opioid prescriptions written annually in the U.S. as there are adults. And the U.S. consumes 80% of the world's opioid production, even though we only represent 5% of the world's population. So what the hell is up with that? Professor Friedman thinks it has a lot to do with the rise and fall of dopamine receptors, or D2s, in the brain's reward circuitry, which brings us around to monkey brains again. Hey! Some white-jacketed lab guys with a lot of time and cocaine on their hands have discovered that monkeys tend to become raging coke fiends when you stress them out. However, if you give those same monkeys lots of grooming and elevated social status, and some hot monkey loving, in other words, turn them into the monkey equivalents of Richard Branson, Jennifer Aniston, or Elon Musk, then the pampered elite monkeys don't go after the Bolivian marching powder with quite so much determination. Monkeys in the middle probably just do bong hits and become solid masturbators, but the article made no mention of that. Anyway, this is all tied up with D2 receptors. A body of research now proves there's a strong correlation between D2 receptors and environmental stress levels. The more well-off a monkey feels, the more D2 receptors its brain develops. The higher the number of D2 receptors in a monkey's brain, the higher its natural level of pleasure, and the less it feels the need to seek out hardcore drugs or comfort food to compensate. It's a virtuous cycle. Good to know if you're starting at the bottom as the monkey junkie equivalent of a crack whore, right? Because this D2 stuff cuts both ways. Increased stress lowers D2 levels, leading to a brain that craves frosted chocolate fudge Pop-Tarts and OxyContin just to feel normal again. But then, when you start eating the Pop-Tarts and popping the OxyContins like aspirin, your D2 receptors dry up, leaving you more susceptible to irritation, physical discomfort, and thoughts about malicious archons running the show here on Earth. It's a downward spiral as opposed to a virtuous cycle. American ingenuity has contributed to this problem by making food and drugs more addictive than ever. It doesn't really matter if it's archons dicking us around or just corporate profit takers running amok. Americans, collectively, will be getting more fat-assed and drug-addled if this trend continues. You can see it happening in real time if you routinely visit Walmart stores in Pennsylvania or northern Michigan. If you've ever wondered why Europeans regard most Americans as blubbery scum, this is at least part of the answer. As for the rest of the answer, I'm sure it doesn't help when we, as a nation, go tromping through other countries, acting like loud, brash, war-happy masters of the universe, after electing obviously incompetent leaders like George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Return to main text. As it happens, I also married a woman who stopped loving me because I didn't talk to her enough. Note 29. It's true, I can be an incommunicative lout at times, especially when I'm writing, but I mean well. A few months ago, she finally asked me for a divorce. A few weeks ago, we sold our big, beautiful house in Montclair, New Jersey. A few days ago, I started looking for a cheap apartment on the Upper West Side in New York City. Hopefully one that doesn't smell like a lumberjack's sulfurous fart reek as he digests a Douglas fir. Note 30. Update. On July 22, 2017, I moved into a third-floor walk-up with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, nice hardwood floors, and no hint of diuretic, pine-cone-munching Yeti smells. So far, at least. Return to main text. The irony is that now that we're committed to disentangling our lives, my wife and I are talking in a refreshingly open and honest way that we hadn't seemed capable of for years. We seem to be past all the harsh recriminations and moving toward a place of mutual understanding. I get it now. 17 years of me is enough for anybody. When I catch my wife looking out a window with her golden hair undone, she looks lovely to me. So I'm wearing my lit tossed lightly. I'm not addicted to anything or throwing away my money on bad stock market decisions. I'm not even dating a deaf girl. I'm just sitting here writing this essay to show the world what a loser I've become. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as failure porn. I write books that don't sell. My last novel was reviewed by 6 people and purchased by roughly twice that many readers. I'll never win a MacArthur Genius Grant for writing a critically acclaimed work of literary fiction like Infinite Jest. I'll never write a best-selling addiction memoir and experience the pleasure of drinking opium tea with Nick Cave in the phantom city of Essaouira. I'll never become America's most beloved horror humorist and be graced with the kind of financial success that was bestowed on my old pal, Christopher Moore. Does that bother me? Probably. But it bothers me less than you might think. Sure, this essay could be dismissed as nothing more than, quote, circuitous revenge, the indirect blow, unquote, against more successful writers of my acquaintance. I'd be in denial if I said there wasn't at least some of that going on. Writers are a notoriously thin-skinned lot and prone to feuding, etc. But trust me, it goes deeper than that. In a strict financial sense, I usually do well enough as a commercial artist to get by, even in pricey New York City. I don't need my books to sell. In fact, it's probably better for me, psychologically, if they don't. That way, if I want to sit down and write a 25,000-word essay about David Foster Wallace as my marriage goes off the rails, there's no huffy sales-obsessed agent or editor around to stop me. Besides, there's something insidious at work in the international prestige lit game that would seem to preclude my books from being acquired by any of the big 5 publishers. It's similar to what's been going on with movies and television. I'm not talking about the archons here, necessarily. What I'm talking about is the military-industrial media intelligence complex. 2 acquaintances of mine, the film scholar Matthew Alford and the investigative historian Tom Secker, have sifted through 4,000 new Freedom of Information Act documents to prove that U.S. military and intelligence agencies have been involved in over 800 major movies and more than 1,000 TV shows. Note 31. For details, you can read their new book, National Security Cinema, The Shocking New Evidence of Government Control in Hollywood, published by Insurge Intelligence in 2017. Return to main text. It doesn't stop there. Joel Whitney's recent book, Thinks: How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Writers, reveals how the CIA has colluded with literary magazines like the Paris Review and co-opted writers like Peter Matheson and George Plimpton and journalists, far too many to name, to wage ideological warfare against the rest of humanity via covert programs like MH Chaos and Operation Mockingbird. In short, the U.S. military-industrial media intelligence complex has been deploying choice bits of American culture as weaponized meme-plexes that can incapacitate an enemy or pacify and demoralize entire nations. They figured out that they can just mind-bomb people with inanity to dumb them down or make them depressed, a la Infinite Jest, instead of having to kill them. If you can confuse people into inaction, you can steal from them and exploit them with impunity. Don't believe me? Listen to this excerpt from a 1997 U.S. Army War College essay written by frequent Fox News guest, Army Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Quote,
Information destroys traditional jobs and traditional cultures. It seduces, betrays, yet remains invulnerable. How can you counterattack the information others have turned upon you? There is no effective option other than competitive performance. For those individuals and cultures that cannot join or compete with our information empire, there is only inevitable failure. Information from the internet to rock videos will not be contained, and fundamentalism cannot control its children. Our victims volunteer. In this age of television series franchising, videos, and satellite dishes, this young, embittered male gets his skewed view of us from reruns of Dynasty and Dallas, or from satellite links beaming down Baywatch. Sources we dismiss too quickly as laughable and unworthy of serious consideration as factors influencing world affairs. But their effect is destructive beyond the power of words to describe. Hollywood goes where Harvard never penetrated, and the foreigner, unable to touch the reality of America, is touched by America's irresponsible fantasies of itself. He sees a devilishly enchanting, bluntly sexual, terrifying world from which he is excluded, a world of wealth he can judge only in terms of his own poverty. Contemporary Contemporary American culture is the most powerful in the world, is the most powerful in history, and the most destructive of competitor cultures. Unquote.
You leave behind smoking ruins and crying widows if you never send American troops into a war you don't mean to win.
Famous authors will insist that no one tells them what to write.
And you massive, useless class.
And of course that's true, because what they write already suits the purposes of the military-industrial media intelligence complex, or the Archon of international prestige lit. Those authors embody the memes that the military-industrial media intelligence complex wants to propagate. That's why their books are widely published and heavily promoted. It's just like Harold Bloom said, there's a kind of Gresham's Law for literature. We could call it John Grisham's Law. The bad books drive the good books into obscurity. With that in mind, I'd like to juxtapose two quotes from David Foster Wallace. The first is from a letter DFW wrote to Jonathan Franzen right around the time he was finishing up Infinite Jest. Quote, "If words are all we have as world and God, we must treat them with care and rigor. We must worship." Unquote. The second quote is from Wallace's Kenyon College commencement address.
"There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And a compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths or some inviolable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive."
If Wallace had consulted the Gnostics, he would have known that worshipping a rabid god like Yahweh, aka the Demiurge, would pretty much get him eaten alive too. But worshipping words, well, that was just asking for trouble. I mean, the Archon of international prestige lit wasn't exactly kind to Wallace in the end, was it? Plenty of people have speculated that he hung himself because he knew he could never write another book that would surpass Infinite Jest. That inner certainty must have lit up his self-loathing brain circuitry like a Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. Novelist and psychoanalyst Timothy Lacan makes an interesting observation about Wallace's self-loathing circuitry in a Jacques Lacan-infused essay called The Psychosis of David Foster Wallace. Lacan's premise is that Wallace's main psychological problem was not atypical depression or his susceptibility to addiction, but instead compensated psychosis as theorized by Lacanian psychoanalysis. He explains, Wallace's numerous nervous breakdowns indicate that something more serious than depression was going on. For psychoanalysis, psychosis is not a disease but an existential orientation. It is a special kind of relationship with language and the body, one that cannot be, quote, cured, unquote. History is filled with gifted psychotics, from Isaac Newton to Ludwig Wittgenstein to Glenn Gould, where the neurotic suffers from the limitations imposed by repression, the psychotic suffers from an absence of limits. Psychotic genius is sprawling, as is psychotic suffering. Lacan's essay is a rich word stew with phrases like, quote, the desperate, performative narcissism of the nameless pariah.
That is a lot of weight moving fast!
Frankly, that sort of armchair psychoanalyzing almost never works for me. But what I found myself appreciating about Lacan's essay was his citation of Stanford researcher Tanya Luhrmann's work and his extrapolations from her findings. In 2014, Luhrmann devoted herself to comparing reports of aural hallucinations from psychotic people in India, Ghana, and the United States. She discovered that, quote, the nature of the relationship between psychotic subjects and their voices differed greatly from culture to culture, unquote. Many of the Indians and Ghanaians were reportedly on friendly terms with their voices, but every last one of the Americans heard voices that persecuted them. Lacan derived an interesting new theory from that data. I believe that the explanation for this phenomenon lies in the inhuman ferocity of consumerism. It is not just an economic system, it is a terrible god, and it speaks in our unconscious. The inane, restless voice that Wallace so brilliantly captures is neither his voice, nor some hypothetical, eternal superego voice. It is a direct transcription of the frivolous, harrying voices of capital and publicity themselves. The clarity with which Wallace renders this voice is both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness as a writer. A few paragraphs earlier in that same essay, Lacan wrote, "The schizophrenic does not speak, he is spoken like a puppet." Wallace, of course, was supremely gifted when it came to rendering this voice that could not be stopped or slowed down for the simple reason that he was tormented by it his entire life. I suspect that his fascination with American particularism derived from the knowledge that the voice in his head was not his, but rather the voice of America, one against which he was incapable of defending himself. Just let that sink in. The logorrheic, incessant voice of America was coming through David Foster Wallace. Not the sort of feel-good, I sing of America voice of our sham democracy that Walt Whitman was famous for channeling, but the real deal. America as it is, replete with drug addicts, depressives, cross-dressing intelligence agents, and tedium-besieged civil servants. The America undone by corporate greed
I am Aladdin.
and government irresponsibility. The America of cutthroat commerce that says, "Your misery is our opportunity." The America that spends U.S. tax dollars to put its own citizens under constant surveillance and makes them the most propagandized people on earth. The America so in love with its own servitude that it exalts its billionaire betrayers and hates anyone who makes it think about things that can't be tweeted in 140 characters or less. The America that sells us cigarettes, oxycodone, CIA heroin, St. Ides malt liquor, jacked 3D bacon cheddar ranch Doritos, Big Macs, Top Gun, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The America that miseducates its children because a nation full of ignorant, craven, subservient people is the kind of nation the oligarchs like best. The America that cons us into believing we have certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when in actual fact we're all more or less suckers for mass marketing campaigns that turn us into debt-burdened wage slaves and self-harming meat sacks shot through with psychic poisons. The America where someone like Brainy Dave Wallace can mimic the voices of his inborn self-loathing circuitry and write a big fat book about junkie house burglars, suicidal sorority girls, stone solipsists, and a lethal form of entertainment known as Infinite Jest. And the great American hype machine will turn that depressing, somehow spiritually draining book into a bestseller on every high IQ kid's reading list. That America. Perhaps best summed up by the New Jersey physician poet William Carlos Williams, who wrote, quote, "America is a pathetic place where something stupefying must always happen for fear we wake up." Unquote.
That weapon is words.
Note 33.
Words are weapons.
At a February 1981 meeting with newly elected President Reagan, CIA Director William Casey must have been thinking pretty much the same thing when he said in front of multiple witnesses, including Barbara Honegger, who shortly thereafter reported it to senior White House correspondent Sarah McClendon, who made it public. Quote, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." Unquote. Return to main text. Here's what I think. The voices of our inborn self-loathing circuitry belong to the archons of America, and their only goal is to fuck us up. Of course, you're free to draw your own conclusions.
Fuck you, America, for being so full of lies, for being biggest and baddest of everything, but violent, destructive, and fearful about humanity. I pledge to crush you with beauty, song, and dance, and the wonderful beating of my living heart, baby. baby.
Hear my fluttering, one song of the other, who dares to make no difference. Over and over, I'll be your butterfly, floating on the sea. Won't you run away with me?